Hello, my name is Daniel Clemens, the HEMA Vtuber. For the last week or two, I have had a fixation on what is definitely one of the most popular kind of knives, the kukri. The kukri is a forward-curving knife from Nepal and is most famous as the combat weapon of the Gurkhas, an elite fighting force in the British, Nepalese, and Indian militaries. It is also well regarded by bushcraft enthusiasts and gained literary fame as the blade used to decapitate Dracula in Bram Stoker's novel. The kukri rivals tantos and bowie knives for popularity, but it has some myths that are repeated as fact way too frequently, and that's what we're going to talk about today. The first myth is that the kukri was inspired by the kopis, brought to India by Alexander the Great. This theory doesn't make sense at all. Alexander was in India for a few years during the 4th century BCE. The oldest kukris we know about for sure date to the 1500s. Any kopis that was brought in during Alexander's invasion was rusted junk for hundreds of years before the kukri was invented. Beyond that, Alexander never made it to Nepal itself. For this theory to be true, you'd have to see kopis blades adopted and iterated on for hundreds of years as the pattern moved east, much the same way you can trace the Turco-Mongol saber moving west. You don't see that. There's no temple art with a kopis or major archaeological finds of the sword outside of where and when Alexander might have been. It's much more likely that both kinds of blades evolved separately from turning farming sickles into combat weapons. So why does this theory exist? Well, as of much of poorly thought out history theories, we can blame the Victorians for that. The English first encountered the kukri during the Anglo-Nepalese War in 1814. Another thing that became popular in the 19th century is weird racist pseudoscience. I have no proof of this, but I speak with the confidence of a Victorian-era anthropologist when I say some Victorian-era anthropologist looked at this amazing weapon and said, actually, white people made this because we have special skulls. However, as I said, I can't prove my theory. It's just what fits best with what I know and what I could find with research. This next myth, though, is something that's actually fairly easy to test. This notch in the kukri blade is called the cho, and in contrast to the bad anthropology from earlier, researchers asked locals what it's for. Unfortunately, they didn't have the answer either, but there are several theories. The first theory is that it's a bloodletting spike, because tradition says you can't draw a kukri and resheath it without drawing blood. This isn't true because no culture has such a tradition. Bloodthirsty weapons are a common feature in folklore and legends for individual blades. It's not something practiced by any group. If you know a Gurkha who cuts themselves on their kukri, they are doing it to mess with you. Beyond the fact that you need to draw it for regular maintenance, the kukri is an amazing bushcraft knife. Nobody is going to slice their fingers every time they make a fire to boil tea. A more reasonable theory, the one I was doubtful of before I even tested it, is that the cho is capable of catching your enemy's blade. I tested this out by running another blade down my kukri as safely as I could. It caught better than I expected, which doesn't mean it worked well. The smallest change in angle means the difference between your opponent's blade barely stopping or you losing all your fingers. Even the smallest crossguard would work as a better blade catcher and hand protector. So I have to say that no, the cho is not there to catch your opponent's blade. Some say the cho is there to cause blood to drip off the blade so that it doesn't make the handle slippery. I didn't have any blood I was willing to spare for the test, but I did have a water bottle. I tried my best to position the blade in such a way that the water would roll down the length and get to the cho. And although you can see the water follow the blade a little, it actually comes off the curve before that. If I pause it here, you can see that the cho is actually redirecting some of the water away from the handle. So realistically, I can't say that it doesn't help, but it does so little that it might as well do nothing. Lastly, the handle is flared at the base and has a raised portion in the middle to make it easy to grip while wet, so the handle becoming slick with blood isn't even a concern in the first place. Finally, there is one other theory about why the Cho is that shape. Unfortunately, my wife won't let me put the picture on YouTube, so you're out of luck. And that's why I wanted to cover about the Kukri. It's a fantastic blade, well deserving of its status as the national weapon of Nepal, and an awesome weapon against zombies and vampires. However, it is not Greek, and you don't have to cut yourself to use one. Let me know in the comments if you have one of your own, how you got it, and what you use it for. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed it, you can like and subscribe for more.